Okay, so now that our AWS environment is configured, we're ready to simulate our attack scenario. So let's go ahead and do that now. And to do that, we'll use the sample script that you downloaded in the prior lesson. That's going to be in this scripts directory. So it's going to be right here. And it's going to be the one called start cryptomining simulation.sh. So if we open up that file, this was a script that was originally shared by the AWS team with MIT no attribution. So we're reusing that, but we've modified it just a little bit. We've added a few things and removed a couple things as well. And you can either look at it through the GitHub repository, or if you have a code editor like VS Code, you can also open up that file in VS Code, especially if you want to make some changes. So let me go ahead and open that up here so we can take a look at it in our editor right here. So let me scroll back up. And so this is going to take one argument. It's going to be the profile argument, which is going to be our AWS CLI profile, which is going to be that victim profile. First, what we're going to do is we're going to create a file that's base64 encoded. And if you were to decode this, which I won't do right now, you can do it if you want to, but we'll actually take a look at that through our investigation. So you'll get to see what it does. Just as a quick hint, it's going to use the dig utility, and it's going to call or make multiple calls to crypto mining related websites. And so this is going to be our user data for the EC2 instance, which essentially tells the EC2 instance, I want you to run these scripts or run these commands as you launch my EC2 instance. So it's going to execute all that code above. Then we're going to generate a little bit of noise to make it more interesting. We're going to have the attacker simulating the whoami call. We're also going to have them list attached user policies for their user of Michael once they figure out their user Michael. Then we're going to create a backdoor user with name administrators. Then we're going to attach the admin user policy to administrators. And then we're going to create an access key, again, a backdoor access key for this user. After that, we're going to look up VPCs, subnets, and AMIs in this AWS environment. And we're going to use that returned information to create or launch our EC2 instance using one of the found AMIs. We're going to launch an instance type of T3.nano, which is one of the cheaper ones that you can use for this instance type, at least at the time of recording, costs less than 1 cent per hour. So you're talking about $4 a month if you kept this running 24/7, which you're not going to, right? We'll delete this after we're done with this course. But even if you forget to turn it off, we're talking about $4 a month. Really, really cheap resource. If you want to use something different, something beefier for whatever reason, feel free to do that. You can change that in this script right here. But otherwise, if you're trying to save money, I would recommend just leaving to the default that I selected here. Then we're going to pass in that user data that we created above in the script. We're going to launch it in a specific subnet ID. We're going to tag it, and then we're going to output log information in log.txt in a newly created output directory. And that's it. It's a pretty simple attack script. Not too much going on. It looks like a lot because the base64 data takes up a lot of real estate in this document. But again, it's really not that much. Feel free to take a look at it if you're interested in learning more about how it works. Next, we need to run this script. So first things first, we need to make this script executable. And the way that we can do that is I'm actually going to navigate into the scripts directory, and I'll do chmod +x, and we'll pass in the correct file of start cryptomining simulation and press enter. And then we can go ahead and run this attack script. So we'll do start cryptomining simulation, and we'll pass in our victim CLI profile. Make sure you're using victim, which is the one that we just configured in the prior lesson, and not your security deploy role. All right, let's go ahead and execute our script. We should see creating resources for simulation. We'll have the user ID. This is the STS get caller identity command. Then we're listing out the policies for that user. We're creating our backdoor user that I was talking about, as well as the backdoor access key. And then a very important piece of information here is we're getting back an instance ID. So the instance successfully launched, and we received the ID of it, which we're going to use later on. So I'm copy pasting this in my notes, and I recommend that you do the same. But we have a success on the attack script, which is a good start. This instance ID, by the way, is an example of what you would receive from GuardDuty threat detection. So it would say, hey, we detected an incident or something going on. You should look into it. And here's the instance ID that is related to this detection. So take a look at that. We should also see a couple of different files that were created in the output directory under scripts, we'll have an AMI1.json. That's the AMI used to launch the instance. We'll have log.txt. That gives us information about the EC2 instance, but we'll also retrieve this separately through our incident response process. And then that user data that I was talking about. So we don't really necessarily need to look at that. It's helpful for troubleshooting, especially if you have any issues with the script, but otherwise, this is really just there for information purposes. We're going to go through step by step on how to find out all of that information through our incident response. And speaking of threat detection, we're not going to talk about that in this course, as I stated in the previous section as well. We'll reserve that for another course. But ideally, as this attack is going on or shortly after, you should get notified if you have proper monitoring and alerting in place. And so as an example, if you have guard duty enabled, then it can detect multiple EC2 crypto findings. Let me go ahead and pull up some examples of what I mean by that. As an example of one that it could detect, it would be this cryptocurrency EC2 Bitcoin tool.b. And then the second one that it might detect is this one right here with Bitcoin tool.b and then DNS. So these are two related findings that we might get when somebody is using our EC2 instances for Bitcoin or cryptocurrency mining in general. Also, if you want to learn more about threat detection and monitoring and alerting, I have a couple of videos that show that in some of my other courses. So feel free to check this one out. And also feel free to check out this hands-on lab that talks about enabling threat detection with guard duty. So if you're interested, go through those, but that's not a requirement for this course. Now we're going to pretend like this attack alerted us, as we were just talking about. And so we're ready to start investigating and figuring out what's going on. So that's where this lesson ends, and the next one will begin. And so I'll see you there.